I'm Amanda Reeves, 28 years old, living in Burlington, Vermont. On Christmas Eve, in front of our glowing tree and 12 family members, my father stripped me of my $1.2 million inheritance and threw me out into the snow because my sister Natalie convinced him I was stealing from our family business. His voice shook the ornaments on the tree, her crocodile tears fooled everyone, and the sound of the door slamming behind me still echoes in my nightmares. Before we continue, shout out your location in the comments. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Our community is growing, and tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. That night, I discovered my own family was willing to destroy me to cover up my sister's crimes. If it were you, would you have begged for forgiveness you didn't need? Or would you have fought back even when everyone you loved had turned against you? Stay with me, because when the truth finally came out, it didn't just clear my name. It shattered everything my family thought they knew about the golden daughter they'd protected for 28 years. The lies started 3 weeks before Christmas, but I need you to understand who I was before my world collapsed. I was the daughter who never caused problems, who worked 60-hour weeks managing the books for our family's maple syrup distribution business, who spent my weekends helping Dad expand into organic certification and sustainable farming practices. My grandmother Lillian had built Reeves Maple from nothing in 1952, starting with 40 acres of sugar maples and a dream that became Vermont's third largest maple syrup distributor. When she passed 2 years ago, she left her entire fortune to me, not because she loved me more, but because she knew I was the only one in the family who understood the value of hard work. "Amanda," she'd whispered to me in her hospital bed, her weathered hands gripping mine with surprising strength. "This family has a tendency to mistake charm for character. Don't let them convince you that pretty words matter more than honest work." She made me promise to protect what she'd built, to never let anyone take advantage of my quiet nature. I kept that promise for 2 years, even when it meant working late into the night, even when it meant watching my sister Natalie float through life collecting praise for every minor accomplishment while my contributions went unnoticed. Natalie had always been the favorite, the homecoming queen, the sorority president, the daughter who could make Dad laugh until his sides hurt with stories from her marketing job in Boston. But here's what nobody knew about my perfect sister. She had been systematically stealing from our business for 8 months, skimming money through fake vendor invoices and phantom consulting fees. I discovered it on a Tuesday in early December while reconciling our quarterly accounts. At first, I thought it was an error. Surely Natalie wouldn't steal from her own family. But as I dug deeper, the pattern became undeniable. $3,000 here for a social media consultant who didn't exist, $8,500 there for marketing materials that were never delivered, 15 separate transactions over 8 months, all authorized by Natalie's access codes, all funneled into accounts I traced back to her personal spending, designer bags, spa weekends, the down payment on her Boston condo that we'd all assumed came from her salary. The total was $127,000, money that should have gone toward employee bonuses, equipment upgrades, and the sustainable farming initiative that meant everything to Dad. I spent 3 sleepless nights checking and rechecking the numbers, hoping I was wrong. But spreadsheets don't lie, even when family does. I printed everything, bank statements, invoice copies, account records, and put it all in a manila folder that felt like 1,000 pounds. My hands shook as I sealed it, knowing I was about to destroy the family dynamic that had existed my entire life. But I also knew what Grandma Lillian would have wanted me to do. The plan was to show Dad privately, to give Natalie a chance to explain and pay the money back without involving the authorities. I believed then that family meant something, that blood was thicker than greed. I scheduled a meeting with Dad for December 23rd, the day before our traditional Christmas Eve dinner. But when I walked into his office that Tuesday morning, ready to show him the evidence that would break his heart, Natalie was already there. She sat in the leather chair across from his desk, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her voice trembling as she spun a web of lies that would cost me everything.
Dad, I didn't want to tell you this, but I think Amanda has been stealing from the company. I've noticed discrepancies in the accounts, and when I tried to ask her about them, she got defensive and angry. I think she's been using her access to cover her tracks. My father's face went white as she handed him a folder. Not the real evidence I carried, but a carefully crafted collection of doctored documents that made me look guilty of exactly what she had done. The betrayal was so complete, so perfectly orchestrated, that for a moment I couldn't even speak. This is insane, Natalie. You're lying. You're the one who... But my father's expression had already hardened. Amanda, I'm disappointed in you. We'll discuss this tomorrow at dinner, in front of the family. Maybe some public accountability will help you understand the gravity of what you've done.
I tried to show him my evidence, the real bank records that proved Natalie's guilt, but he waved me away. I don't want to hear excuses. Natalie has brought me proof, and frankly, her explanation makes sense. You've always been jealous of her success. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the real evidence, the truth that nobody wanted to see. The manila folder sat open on my coffee table like an accusation, pages of proof that my perfect sister was a thief and my family was willing to believe her lies over my integrity. If it were you, would you have walked away that night knowing that tomorrow would bring a public execution for crimes you didn't commit? Or would you have shown up anyway, hoping that truth would somehow matter more than manipulation? I chose to fight, and that decision changed everything. This story took hours to research and craft, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe would truly make our day. Now, let's get back to it. Christmas Eve arrived gray and bitter, with snow falling in thick sheets that seemed to match the dread settling in my chest. I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, choosing what to wear to my own execution. The red sweater Grandma Lillian had knitted me seemed appropriate. At least I'd look festive while my family destroyed me. I arrived at the family farmhouse at 5 o'clock sharp, the manila folder of real evidence tucked inside my purse like a weapon I hoped I wouldn't need to use. The smell of pine from our 12-foot Fraser fir mixed with Mom's famous cinnamon rolls, creating a Norman Rockwell scene that felt like a cruel joke. 12 relatives filled the living room, aunts, uncles, cousins, who'd driven from Montreal and Boston to celebrate what they thought would be a normal Christmas Eve. Uncle Robert was telling his annual story about the blizzard of '85 when Dad's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "Everyone, I need your attention. We have a family matter to discuss before dinner." The room fell silent. Cousin Jenny muted the Christmas music. Even 5-year-old Tommy stopped playing with his new toy truck. All eyes turned to me, though they didn't know why yet. I felt my face flush as Dad stood beside the fireplace, his expression carved from granite. "It's come to my attention that someone in this family has been stealing from our business. Someone we trusted completely has been embezzling money for months, taking advantage of our family's good faith." His eyes found mine across the room, cold and disappointed. "Amanda, would you like to explain yourself?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the room, I watched faces change, confusion giving way to shock, then judgment. Aunt Patricia gasped and clutched her pearls. Uncle Robert's mouth fell open. My mother's face went white as snow. "Dad, that's not true. I can prove—" "Enough." His voice boomed through the house, rattling the ornaments on the tree. "Natalie showed me the evidence yesterday. Bank statements, forged invoices, money transferred to accounts under your name. Over $100,000, Amanda, from your own family." I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Every face in that room was staring at me with disgust, disappointment, betrayal. These people had watched me grow up, had celebrated my college graduation, had praised my work ethic. Now they saw a thief. "Where is Natalie?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "If she has evidence against me, she should be here to present it." As if summoned by my words, Natalie appeared in the doorway, her timing so perfect it felt rehearsed. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's rent, her hair styled in loose waves that caught the firelight. Even in my moment of crisis, she looked like she'd stepped out of a holiday catalog. "I'm sorry, Amanda," she said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. "I didn't want it to come to this. When I first noticed the discrepancies in the accounts, I hoped there was an explanation, but when you got angry and defensive every time I asked questions..." She pulled out her own folder, thick with papers that looked official and damning. "I had to investigate, for the family, for Grandma Lillian's legacy." The mention of our grandmother's name from Natalie's lips felt like sacrilege. I watched in horror as she handed Dad document after document, each one meticulously crafted to frame me for her crimes. Fake bank statements showing deposits to accounts with my name, forged invoices with my digital signature, payment authorizations that looked like my handwriting but felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. "This is incredible," I said, my voice growing stronger as anger replaced shock. "You've created an entire fiction, Natalie, but I have the real records right here." I reached for my purse, but Dad's hand shot up to stop me. "I don't want to see more lies, Amanda. The evidence is clear. Natalie even has recordings of conversations where you admitted to taking the money." My blood turned to ice. "What recordings? I never admitted to anything because I didn't do anything." Natalie's eyes flickered with something that might have been triumph, though she quickly masked it with sorrow. "You were drunk at Cousin Mark's wedding in October. You told me you'd been borrowing money from the business to invest in cryptocurrency. You said you'd pay it back when your investments paid off."
That never happened, I shouted, my composure finally cracking. I don't even drink at family events, and I've never invested in cryptocurrency in my life. But I could see from the faces around the room that it didn't matter what I said. Natalie had woven her web too carefully, too completely. She'd created a narrative that explained everything. My supposed defensive behavior, my access to the accounts, even a motive that made sense to people who didn't know me as well as they thought they did. "Dad, Amanda, I need you to return the money immediately. All of it. And I'm removing you from your position at the company, effective immediately." "Dad, please, just look at the real evidence." "Furthermore," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken, "your grandmother's inheritance is being transferred to a trust managed by Natalie. Someone who steals from family doesn't deserve to inherit from it." The room spun around me. $1.2 million. Grandma Lillian's life's work, her trust in me, her belief that I would protect the family legacy. Stripped away, based on lies. I looked around the room desperately, searching for one face that might show doubt, one person who might question Natalie's perfect performance. But all I saw was disappointment. Uncle Robert shook his head sadly. Aunt Patricia whispered to her husband behind her hand. Even my mother couldn't meet my eyes, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed the shame of having raised a daughter who would steal from her own family. "Get out," Dad said quietly, but his words carried the weight of absolute finality. "Get out of this house and don't come back until you're ready to admit what you've done and make this right." I stood frozen for a moment, clutching my purse with its useless evidence, staring at faces that had shown me love for 28 years, but now reflected only disgust. Natalie watched me with an expression of perfectly crafted sorrow, but I caught something else in her eyes, a flash of satisfaction so quick that anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't miss it. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that she had planned every word, every document, every carefully timed entrance. She had orchestrated my destruction with the precision of a master manipulator, and she was enjoying every second of it. The front door slammed behind me with the sound like thunder, cutting me off from the warmth, the light, the laughter I could still hear through the windows. I stood in the falling snow, my red sweater already dusted with white, staring back at the golden glow of the house where my family was probably already serving dinner without me. For the first time in my life, I was completely,
utterly alone. I drove through the blizzard for 2 hours before I could see clearly enough to pull over. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel, and the heater in my old Honda couldn't fight off the cold that seemed to come from inside my bones. I sat in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner in Montpelier, staring at my phone as it buzzed with messages I couldn't bear to read. The first few were from cousins who'd witnessed my public humiliation. "Amanda, what were you thinking?" And "How could you steal from family?" But then came one that made me pause. It was from my college roommate, Zoe Chen, who lived 3 hours away in Manchester, New Hampshire. "Saw your dad's Facebook post. Call me. Something doesn't add up." I hadn't even thought about social media, but apparently Dad had already announced my disgrace to the world. With trembling fingers, I opened Facebook to find his post, disappointed to discover that family trust can be betrayed. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most, praying for healing and wisdom during this difficult time. The comments were already piling up. Neighbors offering sympathy, family friends expressing shock, business associates promising continued support for the family during this challenging period. I was being erased from my own life in real time, transformed from trusted daughter to cautionary tale with the click of a button. But Zoe's message stood out because she was the only person who knew me well enough to question the narrative. We'd shared late-night study sessions, work stress, relationship drama. She'd seen me cry over a $20 discrepancy in my checking account because I was so obsessive about financial accuracy. The idea that I would steal 6 figures from my own family was absurd to anyone who truly knew me. I called her from that diner parking lot, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what had happened. Zoe listened without interruption, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Amanda, I need to tell you something. I work in forensic accounting now, remember? What you're describing, the perfectly timed evidence, the preemptive accusations, the emotional manipulation, it's textbook financial fraud with a scapegoat. Someone taught your sister these techniques, or she's naturally gifted at it." Zoe explained that real embezzlement leaves messy trails, not the kind of neat evidence packages that Natalie had presented. Actual thieves try to hide their crimes, not create elaborate paper trails pointing to themselves. But framing someone else, that requires careful planning and document creation. Your sister didn't just steal money, she's been building a case against you for months. For the first time since Dad's voice had thundered through the living room, I felt something other than despair. Zoe believed me. More than that, her professional expertise gave weight to what my gut had been screaming. This was all wrong.
"Can you drive down here?" she asked. "Bring everything you have. If your sister fabricated evidence this elaborate, there will be tells. Digital forensics don't lie, even when people do." I spent that night on Zoe's couch, finally able to sleep knowing someone was on my side. The next morning, Christmas Day, we spread all my evidence across her dining room table. While families everywhere were opening presents, we were building a case to save my life. Zoe's expertise revealed things I'd missed in my emotional state. The bank statements Natalie had shown Dad weren't just forged, they were poorly forged. "Look at these dates," Zoe said, pointing to transaction records. "She's claiming you made these transfers on days when the bank was closed. And these account numbers? They're not even in the right format for Vermont Community Bank." More damning was what Zoe found in the metadata of the digital documents Natalie had provided. She created these files last week, not over the 8 months she claims to have been investigating. And look at this. She used the same computer to create both the fake evidence against you and what she probably thought were legitimate-looking invoices to cover her tracks. We spent the entire day building a timeline. Zoe's contacts in banking helped us pull real records that showed the money had indeed been stolen, but through methods that required Natalie's specific access codes and authorization levels, not mine. The cryptocurrency story was particularly laughable once we dug into it. Natalie had opened accounts in my name, using information from old tax documents, but the IP addresses traced back to her Boston apartment. This is actually impressive in its complexity, Zoe said as we worked through the night. She's been planning this for months, maybe longer. The question is, why now? The answer came when Zoe ran a credit check on Natalie that made my stomach drop. My perfect sister was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, student loans in default, rent 3 months behind. She'd been living a facade, and when the walls started closing in, she'd decided to steal her way out and frame me as backup. But the most chilling discovery came when Zoe dug deeper into Natalie's digital footprint. She'd been researching me obsessively, my bank accounts, my access codes, my work habits. She'd even joined a Facebook group called Dealing with Jealous Siblings, where she'd posted thinly veiled complaints about her sister who thinks she's better than everyone. Amanda, Zoe said quietly, this wasn't opportunistic. She's been planning to destroy you for a long time. The business theft was just the method. Armed with real evidence, we started making calls. First to Vermont Community Bank, where the security director agreed to meet with us after Christmas. Then to a forensic accountant Zoe recommended, who specialized in family business fraud. Finally, to the one person I'd been avoiding, a criminal defense attorney. Daniel Morrison practiced white-collar criminal defense in Burlington, and Zoe had worked with him on previous cases. When we laid out the evidence, his expression grew grave. Ms. Reeves, what your sister has done isn't just theft. It's identity theft, wire fraud, and possibly RICO violations if she's done this before. But the family angle complicates things. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? I thought about Grandma Lillian's weathered hands gripping mine, her warning about mistaking charm for character. I thought about 28 years of watching Natalie glide through life while I worked in the shadows. I thought about Dad's voice cutting through Christmas laughter to destroy my reputation in front of everyone I loved. She made it ugly when she decided to frame me for her crimes. I'm prepared to fight back. Morrison explained that we had enough evidence to clear my name and probably send Natalie to prison, but it would require filing criminal charges against my own sister. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your family will have to choose between believing the evidence or protecting her. Based on what happened at Christmas, which way do you think they'll choose? The question hung heavy between us. I knew my family loved Natalie more, had always loved her more. Even with ironclad proof of her crimes, would they find a way to blame me for bringing shame on the family? Would they accuse me of vindictiveness, of destroying Christmas forever, of being unable to forgive and move on? But then I remembered something else Grandma Lillian had told me. Integrity isn't about being liked, Amanda. It's about being able to live with yourself. I'd built my entire life around quiet integrity, believing that good work and honest dealing would be rewarded. Natalie had weaponized that integrity against me, counting on my reluctance to fight back publicly. Mr. Morrison, I said, file the charges. All of them. As we left his office that evening, Zoe squeezed my arm. You know this is going to get worse before it gets better, right? When cornered animals fight back, they don't fight fair. I nodded, thinking of Natalie's satisfied expression as I'd been thrown out into the snow. She already showed me who she really is. I'm just finally ready to show everyone else. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone, watching the family group chat explode with messages about my breakdown and desperate attempts to shift blame. They were already circling the wagons around Natalie, already crafting explanations for why the evidence against her couldn't possibly be real.
But for the first time in days, I wasn't alone. Zoe had taken time off work to help me fight. Morrison was building a case that would expose the truth, and somewhere in the digital evidence we'd compiled was the power to prove that the quiet daughter they'd dismissed had been right all along. If it were you, would you have filed charges against your own sister, knowing it might destroy your family forever? Or would you have walked away, letting lies stand to preserve relationships built on false foundations? I chose the hard path, because Grandma Lillian hadn't raised me to accept injustice, even when it wore a familiar face. The real war was about to begin. The Burlington Police Department felt like stepping into another world on January 3rd. Detective Lisa Harper had agreed to meet with Morrison and me after reviewing our preliminary evidence package, and her expression as she flipped through the documents told me everything I needed to know before she spoke a word. "Miss Reeves, this is one of the most elaborate fraud schemes I've seen in 15 years of financial crimes investigation," she said, spreading our evidence across the conference room table. "Your sister didn't just steal money, she constructed an entire alternate reality designed to destroy your credibility and reputation." The detective explained that cases like mine were becoming more common as families fought over inheritance and business assets, but the sophistication of Natalie's planning was unusual. Most family fraud is opportunistic. Someone sees a chance and takes it. This shows months of premeditation, identity theft, and what we call reputation laundering, systematically building a false narrative to cover criminal activity. Detective Harper had already begun investigating independently after Morrison filed our complaint. What she'd discovered made my blood run cold. Natalie's credit card records showed she'd purchased software for creating fake bank statements, had paid for background check services to gather my personal information, and had even hired a private investigator to monitor my daily routines and work schedule. She knew exactly when you'd discover the theft. The timing of her preemptive accusation wasn't coincidence. She'd been tracking your quarterly reconciliation schedule for months. She planned to frame you on the exact day you'd normally find discrepancies in the accounts. But the most damning evidence came from Natalie's own digital footprint. The detective's cybercrimes unit had traced the fake cryptocurrency accounts to her Boston apartment, complete with timestamps showing when she'd accessed them. More importantly, they'd found her research history. Months of Google searches for terms like how to frame someone for embezzlement and creating fake financial documents. She got cocky, Detective Harper said with grim satisfaction. Criminals always think they're smarter than investigators, but digital evidence doesn't lie. Your sister left a trail that leads directly back to her. The warrant for Natalie's arrest was issued on January 8th. I wasn't there when they arrested her at her Boston condo. Morrison had advised me to stay away to avoid any appearance of vindictiveness, but Detective Harper called to give me the details. Natalie had tried to run when she saw the police cars, had denied everything until they showed her the digital evidence, and had finally broken down crying and blaming me for forcing her into this situation. Even in custody, she couldn't accept responsibility for her own choices. The family's reaction was swift and predictable. Within hours of the arrest, my phone exploded with messages ranging from fury to disbelief. My dad's call came first, his voice shaking with rage. "How could you do this to your own sister? She made a mistake, Amanda, but having her arrested? This is vindictive and cruel." The conversation lasted 15 minutes and ended with him hanging up on me when I refused to drop the charges. Mom called next, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "She's your sister, Amanda. Family protects family. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her?" Uncle Robert's message was more direct. "You've destroyed this family. I hope you're proud of yourself." Cousin Jenny sent a long text about forgiveness and Christian values. Even Aunt Patricia, who'd gasped in horror at the Christmas Eve revelation, now seemed to think I was the villain for refusing to sweep everything under the rug. Only one family member surprised me. Grandma Lillian's sister, my great-aunt Ruth, called from her assisted living facility in Stowe. At 87, her mind was sharp as ever, and her words cut through the family hysteria like a blade. "Amanda, dear, your grandmother told me years ago that she was leaving everything to you because you had spine. The rest of this family mistakes kindness for weakness and charm for character, just like she always said. Don't you dare back down now." Great-Aunt Ruth had seen family dynamics play out for nearly 9 decades, and she understood something the others didn't, that protecting Natalie from consequences would only enable more destructive behavior. Your sister needs to face what she's done, not for your sake, but for hers. Prison might be the only thing that saves her from herself. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 15th. Morrison had warned me that Natalie's defense attorney would try to paint this as a family dispute rather than criminal fraud. Would probably argue for a plea deal that involved restitution but no jail time. "The prosecutor is good," he assured me, "but juries sometimes get squeamish about sending family members to prison." I arrived at the Chittenden County Courthouse that morning wearing the navy suit I'd bought for job interviews after college. Professional, serious, unforgiving. Morrison met me at the entrance, his expression grim.
Amanda, I need to prepare you. Your father is here, and he's brought character witnesses for Natalie. This is going to be harder than we hoped. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but it felt enormous as I walked down the aisle past family members who glared at me like I was the criminal. Dad sat in the front row behind Natalie's table, his face a mask of disappointment and rage. Mom couldn't even look at me. Several family friends filled the seats around them, all there to testify about Natalie's good character and my supposed vindictiveness. Natalie looked different than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the polished veneer she'd always maintained. Her hair was pulled back severely, her makeup minimal, her expression carefully crafted to project remorse and vulnerability. She wore a simple gray dress that made her look younger, more innocent. Even facing felony charges, she was performing. The prosecution presented our evidence methodically. Detective Harper testified about the digital trail, the fake documents, the premeditated nature of the fraud. The forensic accountant explained how the money had been stolen and laundered through fake accounts. Morrison provided context about the inheritance theft and identity fraud aspects. But Natalie's defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Philip Crane, was skilled at creating doubt. He painted me as a jealous sister who'd always resented Natalie's popularity and success. He suggested that I'd discovered Natalie's financial difficulties and had constructed an elaborate frame-up to steal her inheritance. He even implied that I'd fabricated evidence with Zoe's help, that our friendship gave us both motive to destroy his client. The character witnesses were devastating to watch. One after another, family friends testified about Natalie's kindness, her charity work, her dedication to family. They spoke about my alleged jealousy, my quiet resentment, my obsession with money and control. Dad's testimony was the worst. He painted a picture of me as calculating and cold, someone who'd always been envious of Natalie's warmth and social success. "Your Honor," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "Amanda has always been competitive with her sister. When she discovered that Natalie had made some financial mistakes, she saw an opportunity to eliminate her rival for the family inheritance. This prosecution is motivated by greed, not justice." I sat frozen as my own father destroyed my character in open court, using intimate knowledge of my personality and insecurities to make me sound like a sociopath. The fact that every word was a lie didn't matter. He delivered it with such conviction that I could see doubt creeping into the judge's expression. But then something unexpected happened. Natalie took the stand in her own defense, and her lawyer's careful coaching couldn't overcome 28 years of narcissistic behavior. Under cross-examination by the prosecutor, cracks began to show in her victim act. "Miss Reeves," the prosecutor said calmly, "you testified that you only discovered your sister's alleged embezzlement when she became defensive and suspicious about routine questions. But the evidence shows you purchased document creation software 3 months before you claim to have suspected anything. Can you explain that?" Natalie's composure slipped for just a moment, a flash of anger at being questioned, a hint of the calculation that had driven her crimes. "I was trying to help organize family financial records. That's not suspicious." "Yet you used that same software to create fake bank statements with your sister's name on them. That seems like an unusual way to organize legitimate records." The questioning continued for 2 hours, and with each exchange, more of Natalie's true nature emerged. Her answers became defensive, then hostile. She blamed everyone but herself. Me for being jealous, Dad for playing favorites, even Grandma Lillian for creating family tension with her unfair will. The turning point came when the prosecutor asked about the Facebook posts she'd made in the Dealing with Jealous Siblings group. Reading her own words back to her, complaints about my superiority complex and need to control everything, Natalie finally lost control completely. "She always thought she was better than me," she shouted, her careful mask slipping entirely. "Perfect grades, perfect job, Grandma's favorite. I was tired of living in her shadow. She deserved what happened to her." The courtroom went silent. Even Dad looked shocked. In that moment of rage, Natalie had revealed what we all knew, but she'd never admitted.
This wasn't about financial desperation or family dynamics. It was about 28 years of jealousy and resentment finally exploding into calculated destruction. Judge Patricia Coleman called a brief recess, but when we returned, her decision was swift and decisive. The evidence presented shows clear intent to defraud, sophisticated planning, and a complete lack of remorse from the defendant. The court finds sufficient cause to bind this case over for trial on all charges. Natalie's bail was set at $100,000, money she didn't have. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time. The mask was completely gone now, replaced by pure hatred that made my blood freeze. "This isn't over, Amanda," she hissed as they took her through the door. "You'll pay for this." Dad followed her out without looking at me. Mom stopped long enough to whisper, "I hope you can live with yourself," before walking away with the rest of my family. Within minutes, the courtroom was empty except for Morrison, Detective Harper, and me.
Well, Morrison said quietly, she made our job easier. That outburst will be hard to explain away at trial. But as I walked out of the courthouse alone, watching my family drive away without me, victory felt hollow. I'd proven my innocence and exposed Natalie's crimes, but the cost was everything I'd thought mattered to me. The family I'd spent 28 years trying to please had chosen the liar over the truth-teller, the criminal over the victim. If it were you, would you have felt satisfied with justice served, or would you have wondered if winning was worth losing everyone you'd ever loved? I stood on those courthouse steps, snow beginning to fall again, and realized that sometimes the right choice and the easy choice are separated by an ocean of pain. The trial lasted 3 weeks in March, and by the time the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts, 18 months in federal prison, I had learned to live with silence. My phone no longer buzzed with family messages. My mailbox sat empty of birthday cards and holiday invitations. The relatives who had filled our house every Christmas now acted as if I had died rather than simply told the truth. Natalie was sentenced on April 15th. A gray spring morning that matched the heaviness in my chest as I watched my sister led away in shackles. Even then, she couldn't resist one final performance, turning to address the courtroom before the bailiff could stop her. "This is what happens when jealousy destroys a family," she announced, her voice carrying clearly to the gallery where Dad sat with tears streaming down his face. "My sister chose revenge over forgiveness, and now we're all paying the price." Judge Coleman cut her off sharply, but the damage was done. In Natalie's mind, and in the minds of my family, I would always be the villain who had sent an innocent woman to prison, rather than the victim who had refused to be silenced by lies. Walking out of that courthouse for the final time, I realized something that took months to fully understand. Losing my family was not the tragedy I'd thought it would be. The tragedy had been spending 28 years trying to earn love from people who were never capable of giving it freely. The business recovery took 6 months. With Morrison's help, I'd regained control of Reeves Maple and begun the process of rebuilding what Natalie had nearly destroyed. The $127,000 she'd stolen was recovered through asset forfeiture. Her Boston condo, her car, her designer belongings all liquidated to pay restitution. But the deeper damage to employee morale and client relationships required more than money to fix. I hired Sarah Kim, a business consultant who specialized in family company transitions, to help navigate the awkwardness of employees who'd heard about the family dispute through local gossip networks. Some had sided with Dad's version of events, believing I'd been unnecessarily harsh in pursuing criminal charges. Others had suspected something was wrong with the finances long before I'd discovered the theft. Family businesses are like small towns. Everyone knows everyone's business, and loyalty often trumps logic. You need to prove that you're running this company for the employees and the community, not for personal revenge. The proof came through action rather than words. I instituted profit sharing for all employees, something Grandma Lillian had wanted to do but never implemented. I invested in equipment upgrades that improved working conditions and productivity. Most importantly, I opened the books completely. Monthly financial reports available to any employee who wanted to review them, transparent decision-making processes, and clear policies about expense authorization that prevented future fraud. The changes worked. By September, we'd landed 2 new major contracts with organic food distributors in Boston and New York. Revenue was up 30% from the previous year, and for the first time in the company's history, every employee received a year-end bonus that reflected our shared success. But the real transformation happened in my personal life in ways I never could have predicted during those dark winter months after Christmas. Zoe had moved to Vermont in June, accepting a position with a financial crimes unit that worked across New England. Having her nearby provided stability I hadn't realized I needed, someone who understood both the professional and personal stakes of what I'd been through. We started hiking together on weekends, exploring the green mountains that had always been part of my landscape, but never my recreation. "You're different," she told me one Saturday as we reached the summit of Mount Mansfield. "Like you're not constantly bracing for criticism anymore." She was right. The hypervigilance that had defined my relationship with my family, always watching for signs of disapproval, always modifying my behavior to avoid conflict, had simply disappeared. When you've been publicly destroyed and survived it, smaller criticisms lose their power to wound. The unexpected friendship came through Great Aunt Ruth, who introduced me to her bridge club at the assisted living facility. These women, all in their 70s and 80s, had lived through family betrayals, business failures, divorces, and deaths that made my situation feel manageable by comparison. "Honey," said Dorothy Martinez, a retired teacher who'd raised 5 children as a single mother after her husband abandoned them, "family loyalty is a beautiful thing, but it can't be a one-way street. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior."
Through these women, I learned that my story wasn't unique. Helen Nguyen had been cheated out of her restaurant by a business partner who was also her brother. Patricia Williams had been forced to have her own son arrested for stealing her retirement savings. And Mary O'Connor had cut contact with her sister after years of financial manipulation. "The difference between us and you," Helen told me one Thursday afternoon as we played cards, "is that you had the backbone to fight back when you were young enough to rebuild. We spent decades making excuses for people who didn't deserve them. Their perspective helped me understand that choosing justice over family harmony wasn't cruel. It was necessary." Natalie had been enabled by a family system that prioritized peace over accountability, and that enabling had ultimately led to her destruction. By refusing to participate in that system, I'd given her the only chance she had for real redemption, even if she couldn't see it yet. The letter from Natalie arrived in October, forwarded through Morrison's office from the federal facility in Connecticut, where she was serving her sentence. 3 pages of handwritten text that swung between blame and self-pity, with only brief glimpses of actual accountability. She wrote about the unfairness of her situation, about how prison was teaching her that families should stick together no matter what. She claimed she'd only stolen the money because she was desperate and scared, and that I should have helped her instead of destroying her life with legal action. But buried in the middle of the 3rd page was a single paragraph that felt different. "I know you probably won't believe this, but sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about what Grandma Lillian would say about what I did. She always said integrity was more important than comfort, and I chose comfort every time. Maybe you were right to stop me. Maybe this was what I needed to finally grow up." I read those lines several times before filing the letter away. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the closest thing to self-awareness Natalie had ever expressed. Whether prison would actually change her remained to be seen, but at least she was beginning to understand that her actions had consequences beyond her own convenience. The holidays approached with a peace I'd never experienced during previous years. No frantic shopping for relatives who'd forget my gifts by New Year's Eve. No elaborate dinner preparations for people who'd criticize my cooking while praising each other's contributions.
No careful navigation of family dynamics designed to keep everyone happy except me. Instead, Zoe and I volunteered at the Burlington Community Kitchen on Christmas Eve, serving dinner to homeless families and elderly residents who had nowhere else to go. The gratitude in those faces, genuine appreciation for simple kindness, felt more meaningful than any family gathering I'd ever attended. Christmas Day, I drove to Great Aunt Ruth's facility and spent the afternoon with women who'd chosen me as family rather than being assigned to me by genetics. We played cards, shared stories, and laughed at Dorothy's increasingly outrageous tales about her dating life in her 70s. You look happy, really happy, not just pretending. Your grandmother would be proud. She was right. The inheritance I'd fought to protect had grown by 40% through careful investment and business expansion. More importantly, I'd used it to create something meaningful, a thriving company that provided good jobs, a network of chosen family that offered genuine support, and a sense of purpose that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. That night, as I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea and a book, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, I thought it might be Dad, reaching out after almost a year of silence. Instead, it was from Jennifer Walsh, a young woman whose family business had been destroyed by embezzlement from her uncle. I read about your case in the business journal. I'm going through something similar and could use advice from someone who's been there. Would you be willing to talk? I stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about the Bridge Club ladies who'd guided me through the darkest period of my life. They'd shown me that survival stories could become strength for others facing similar battles. I typed back, "Of course, let's talk tomorrow." Over the next few months, Jennifer's case led to 3 others. Family businesses torn apart by fraud, inheritance disputes, sibling rivalries that had escalated into criminal behavior. I found myself becoming an informal consultant for people navigating the intersection of family loyalty and legal necessity. Morrison suggested I formalize this work, perhaps starting a nonprofit focused on family business fraud prevention and recovery. The idea felt right in ways my corporate accounting career never had. This was work that mattered, that used my experience to prevent others from going through what I had endured. By spring, the Amanda Reeves Foundation for Family Business Integrity was incorporated and operating. We provided legal resources, financial forensics, and emotional support for families dealing with internal fraud. Our first major donation came from an unexpected source: the recovery of assets from a case Jennifer and I had worked on together. Standing in our new office space in downtown Burlington, watching volunteers organize educational materials for our first workshop, I thought about the question I'd posed that night after being thrown out into the Christmas snow. Would you fight back when everyone you loved had turned against you?
The answer, I now knew, was more complex than simple revenge or vindication. Fighting back wasn't about destroying my family. It was about refusing to be destroyed by them. It was about choosing integrity over comfort, truth over peace, growth over stagnation. My family had taught me that love should be conditional, that keeping others happy was more important than being honest, that maintaining appearances mattered more than facing reality. But Grandma Lillian's legacy had shown me different values, and losing everything had given me the freedom to build something better. If it were you facing that same choice today, remember this: sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones least capable of seeing who you really are. Sometimes walking away from toxic relationships isn't selfish. It's the only way to discover your own worth. And sometimes the family you choose will love you better than the family you were born into ever could. The snow was falling again outside our office windows, but this time it looked beautiful rather than cold. I had work that mattered, relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation, and a future I was creating rather than one being imposed on me by others' expectations.
That's what real inheritance looks like. Not money in a bank account, but the strength to stand alone when necessary, and the wisdom to build something meaningful from the wreckage of what came before. Got 2 more amazing stories lined up for you. If you dug this one, you're gonna love what's next. Go ahead and click.